Welcome to another episode of the Board of Trade podcast. I think we're up to 17 now or something like that. It's
wow.
Like it's legitimately happening. This is a thing. It's a phenomenon. I'm Jaipaul.
I'm Vijay.
And thank you for joining us once again for yet another conversation about what's happening in Brampton, in addition to baseball.
Yes.
And Halloween. I guess, lots going on. Last time we sat down, it was a very sort of one topic conversation because Stellantis was the thing that was happening.
Yes.
And but today there's a lot of, I think, different things that we can bounce around. So I think it's going to have a little bit of a different vibe. But before we get into that, I guess, the Stellantis conversation, because that's where we left off last time, just sort of checking in now, it's been interesting because there was, a lot of noise, a lot of interest, a lot of people upset. Mm-hmm. And now here we are 2 weeks later, and it feels like nothing has really changed. Nothing has really happened. I know that's not to dismiss those who've been impacted by the decision or the folks at Unifor who I know are working right now to help some of those individuals get reskilled. Yeah. But I mean at the political level, we've not heard boo from Stellantis. We've not really heard from the federal government, and we've not really heard from the provincial government around any of these big proclamations of here's how we're going to enforce and here's how we're going to get tough and all that stuff. Nothing's really materialized.
It's a good point. It's a good observation. The only thing that I've heard recently is the city of Brampton is seeking intervener status.
That's right.
The I guess decision to leave, and we heard during council that there are I guess investigations into what was the nature of the lease that was signed in 1970 or whatever it was, and so I it's kind of interesting because I think. Not to relitigate what we've discussed in our last episode, but I think tariffs were a convenient cover for a decision that most likely would have happened anyway. Especially now that I've kind of looked back at and thought about it, the Biden administration was very bullish on EVs and provided tax credits, and the Inflation Reduction Act was very much prioritizing electric charging infrastructure, things like that. So I have to think at least part of that was in the calculus of the Stellantis move. Obviously, different president, different circumstances, but I'm surprised that nothing has really been said here in Canada. There was so much fervor, when this news came out, and a lot of people have been reaching out to us to get our commentary, and a lot of sympathies were expressed, and but now it just seems like a thing that is, and we're just kind of on to the next headline.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's a byproduct of this particular story and where trade issues fall, or if this is a byproduct of how media news cycles just move faster and faster, which we hear all the time, and so nothing really gets traction. But it is surprising to me, and that's not to suggest that there isn't going to be some resolution. I just think it's interesting that no one's really interested in talking about this issue in the interim. Yeah. And my hope is that there are still conversations. Like we know, for instance, that Mayor Patrick Brown and some members of council did go to Ottawa earlier this week, and they had meetings with Minister Joly, which included discussions around Stellantis and what was enforceable. The intervener status and some of these other topics came up at the time as well. So we know in the background things are happening. But I don't believe that these types of issues get resolved simply in those conversations. These are conversations that I think some things do need to be litigated in the court of public opinion, because how else do you put pressure on a Stellantis to be a good actor?
For sure. Unless
they know there are going to be repercussions. And, when we were at City Hall a week and a couple of days ago, to hear from members of Unifor about the impacts to them, at that point, there was conversation around should we have a Chrysler boycott here in Brampton and things of that nature. And I'm not saying that one should or should not, but I feel like these are the types of discussions, at least, that merit conversation, because that's how you get the attention of a large business. But if all they have to deal with is the backroom conversations with staffers and politicians, I don't know that puts enough influence on a Stellantis to make a decision. And in particular, when we talked about it last time, the acknowledgement that this is not just a Stellantis conversation, but potentially a bellwether for other conversations for automotive and other types of manufacturing in Ontario, I do think this is a conversation that needs to stay public. It needs to stay loud.
Yeah.
And those businesses who are contemplating these types of decisions need to know that there may be a public reckoning for their decision making as well. I think if we stop doing that, we are in fact enabling more businesses to say, well, you know what? So it's only like 3 bad days in the news cycle, and then I move on. Well, like then really, what is the downside of pulling up stakes and moving? So I kind of feel like, in as much as there's nothing to say, we need to make sure we're still saying whatever it is that there is available to us, because under the cover of darkness, I think that's just going to permit the next Stellantis to do the thing they're going to do. That's
interesting, especially because at that same council meeting, we heard from representatives of Unifor, and I know you were too, but I was quite moved by the way in which they were frankly disrespected by Stellantis, and the manner in which they were even updated about the decision, and unfortunately, the mental health impacts of this decision. It led, unfortunately, to an individual taking their own life, and there's a real human story to this that hasn't, I think, effectively been told.
Yeah, and I think if we don't tell it again, I think it's just, if you show there's no consequence, then really what stops the next business from doing this? Because we talked about, like, and I know we're going to talk about some tariff and trade stuff, and there are other elements to this, but coming back to what you spoke to there, that this issue, I think tariff was a cover. This is about these other competitiveness issues, these other business issues that need to be resolved. Well, if none of those things are going to happen quickly. And again, where's the political will going to come from to make those changes if it's not the public saying this is unacceptable? So I think on some level, we have to keep finding ways to share the Stellantis story, make sure that people know that if you're going to be this type of business, that you're not just going to get a bad week of press and then you move on and everything's back to normal again. That there is a consequence. Otherwise, we do risk, other businesses, like the calculus is pretty clear then. Like, well, I can't make money here, I can make money there, I may as well go there. And so what if I upset a few people on the way? They all forget about it. Everyone's watching baseball now. And everyone's forgotten about Stellantis. Right?
Everyone's talking about the Reagan ad. On the flip side, I think, so you saw that there was this massive piece of legislation moving through the provincial legislature, and in that there were a lot of things, but in that contained a ending the month-to-month leases or rent, rental agreements, and that piece of legislation received so much backlash and so much critique that within a few days, the Minister of Housing retracted that.
Had to walk it back.
And I think that's an example of exactly what you're saying on the flip side. Talking about this stuff matters, and it does have a real effect on the decision making of decision makers. And so that's been swirling in my head too. What is, I think there's a tremendous responsibility of, and I keep saying the civil society, but there's a tremendous responsibility of all of us to talk about these issues and publicize them, because I think it would be convenient for some folks for us not to talk about them. Right? So.
No, absolutely. And I think this, so I love that you brought that up, because I think to me, it speaks to what you're describing. And I think we are pretty close to people being able to start a drinking game when we say civil society, and you can take a shot, whatever it is. We're not endorsing anything, but I think there's a game to be played there. But I think there's that piece of about account and holding folks to account and letting them and having them recognize that an issue is not going to go away. And there's any number of issues, particularly with the provincial government, where we've seen the outcry is huge in the moment. The Greenbelt would be a perfect example of this in my mind. Ontario Place is another example of this in my mind. Sorry, not Ontario Place, the Ontario Science Center. I meant to say, where the outcry in the moment.
Ontario Place too, to
a degree, but the Science Center is the one that felt to me the biggest. Like, oh my God, for a day, it was like all everyone wanted to talk about, and then no one talked about it again afterward.
That's true.
And you're right, Ontario Place is an issue too, but that did linger a little bit longer.
It lingered a bit.
But the outrage is high. But I do think that those in government now know if they can just weather the storm for a couple of days, something else will replace it. So I do think there's something there and something for us to be thoughtful about, that if we really want to make change, it's not simply sufficient for us to go to council that one day and make a deputation or to send one letter. I think we need to start thinking about these issues as campaigns almost, to say, if we care about this, then we need to be in it for some period of time. It means we need to have a strategy that ensures that communication stays consistent over some period. And it probably means that we have to do a better job than we do. I think we do an okay job of building coalitions and partnerships, because the only way you can sustain pressure is when it's coming from multiple voices, from multiple perspectives and multiple angles over time. And so if something really matters to us, I think it's okay, we have to sit back and say, okay, it's not enough for you to write a great blog or for me to say something impassioned at council. We've got to think about, sit down with Josh and what are the videos? What are the letters? Who else do we need to reach out to? How do we sustain a conversation for a period to ensure that people don't feel like they can just say a thing and walk away from it, because no one's going to care for more than 24 hours.
Yeah, that's the work of advocacy, is to kind of gently or not so gently remind the public of the ongoing injustices that are taking place, right?
And that's the hard part I'm finding right now, right? Because the challenge is, and this again may speak to the why of a Stellantis, is when there's so many things that it feels like we need to comment on or be active on, it becomes even harder then to sustain and put in. To your point, it's the gentle nudge over time. It's the gentle pressure over time. It's the consistency. It's the figurative, trickle of water that creates the Grand Canyon sort of analogy. Well, if it's that, then how do you sustain that unless you have hyper focus on a handful of issues, whereas we're being drawn into so many things? And I don't think that's a Board of Trade failure. It's a Board of Trade challenge we have to figure out, but there's just so many things. And quite frankly, I do believe that those who wish to further their own agendas at times, I'm trying to find the nicest way to say it, count on that. The fact that, and it's been talked about, in terms of the Trumpian strategy of just, I can't remember the term they use for it, but just like sort of flood the news, and some of the stuff that you're doing is just going to sneak through no matter what, because people just can't defend everything at the same time.
No, absolutely. And I think we're doing a little bit of that too. We are focusing our advocacy on maybe 2 or 3 specific areas, and then we are providing our support to organizations that are leading the charge on other equally important topics, but topics that we either may not have capacity for, or that maybe sit just outside or at the margins of our scope. And folks like Metamorphosis, a fantastic advocacy group that's prioritizing equitable funding for Peel Region with respect to social services. We have a great relationship with them, and we're supporting them wherever we can, and vice versa. But this is, again, feel free to take your shot, but this is the beauty of civil society, right? Where you have a number of organizations that can focus on their specific areas of interest, and they can make each other stronger through support. So.
And that's what I'm really excited. I don't want to give away anything, but I think it's pretty. You've been letting folks know in 2 weeks you're organizing a bit of a policy and government relations summit. For Board of Trade members and those who serve on our Policy and Government Relations Committee to come together. And I'm really, there's a lot of good stuff that's going to come about through that. But one of the pieces I'm most hopeful for is this last thing you're describing, that not only will be an opportunity for us to all meet each other, because so much of our interaction right now is virtual, and an opportunity to identify some key priorities for us to be working on collaboratively across the Board of Trade and our various members and partners. But what I'm really hoping will come about from this is what you're describing here, is to say, okay, of the, I'm just going to make it up, 8 issues that we've got here are the 3 or 4 that BBOT is best suited to take on. But these other ones are just as important. But we'll play backup on these ones. But someone in the room will identify themselves and say, this is our issue, whether it be one of our post-secondary partners or a community service organization, to say, we will take this one on, and Board of Trade, we would love your support on these days and in these ways. But we don't have to be championing everything. And I think, I'm really looking forward to this conversation that's coming up in a couple of weeks, in part just to figure out how are we going to share this load, particularly heading into, as we've talked about on this conversation more than once, municipal elections coming up, federal election always kind of looming in the background, while you have a minority government. and then all the things that need change in general. We can't wage the battle on every front ourselves. So I'm looking for not just having some focus, but also saying, okay, it's not that no one's going to do these things. Partner X is going to do these things, and here's how we'll help them. And hopefully, all the elements that are important will get covered through the coalition of organizations that are working together.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that discussion.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really, really fun.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You tell me.
Well, you referenced the Ford ad, the Reagan ad, depending on what you want to call it. Yeah. And to me, so you mentioned the thing earlier about Minister Kalendra having to walk back some stuff. One of the pieces.
Flack.
Oh, sorry, Flack. Sorry,
Flack.
Change portfolios.
Yes,
My apologies.
Right.
Kalendra's now education.
Yeah.
Mr. Flack having to walk back some of the proposed reforms to rentals. Mm-hmm. Part of it, to your point, was an observation around what happens when public pressure is placed on things. Mm-hmm. There's another observation that I made, in my mind at least, and that is, particularly contrasting it to the Stellantis issue where we started off from, and that is, what are the issues that gain traction in the current climate that we live in? And this leads to this piece around the Ford ad and the Reagan ad, whatever you want to refer to it as, is this, we have a federal government that is really focused on larger strategic priorities, trade relationships, what are the implications to other issues as it pertains to globalization and our relationships with these other countries as it pertains to even peace and other elements. Whereas you have a provincial government that seems to be saying it's not about the strategy, it's about, it's a retail politics dominated provincial government that we have here. And that the focus is on pocketbook issues that resonate with the voter today. Speed cameras and bike lanes and things of that nature. And to me, the Ford ad was this great sort of contrast of how those two things were colliding on the issue of tariff. You have the Prime Minister who's down south along with his members of his cabinet meeting with the trade delegation from the United States to sort out whatever the relationship's going to be as it pertains to trade, CUSMA, and otherwise. And Doug Ford throws into all this, a rock into the middle of that lake and sends all these sort of ripples going, because his focus on this has nothing to do with what's the bigger strategic relationship here in the national interest. It's jobs in Ontario are being threatened, and this has direct impact to the cost of living of my voters. I'm going to say a thing.
Yes.
And depending on your perspective, and depending on who you believe, also, on the narrative of it all. He was either incredibly effective or completely upset the apple cart. But to me, it was this sort of dichotomy of how the Prime Minister and the Premier are addressing this issue. You have a Prime Minister who wants to think about the larger relationship and has a responsibility to think nationally, and a Premier who has a responsibility to think only provincially, but whose tactics fundamentally are about what puts the most money in the pockets of people at the end of the day. And the issue, quite frankly, that's how I saw the issue around the rental piece as well. The issues that this government chooses to weigh in on and be held accountable to are really kitchen table type issues. Yeah. And I just think it's interesting that you have a very sort of strategic approach, a difference in strategic approach here.
That's a good take. And actually I have a very similar read of that situation and this 1-2 punch of Carney and Ford. And it's kind of fascinating to me. So for those who don't know at this point, Premier Ford ran an ad of Ronald Reagan. I think it was like a 7-minute ad of Ronald Reagan, a former president, speaking about the.
Do you think anyone who listens to this podcast does not know Ronald Reagan was a former president of the United States?
Yeah, I know. Fair enough.
I don't know what that overlap of person who's going to listen to the Never Board of Trade podcast but did not know that.
I have no frame of reference anymore. I honestly don't, because sometimes I mention a name.
Yeah.
Josh, do you know who Ronald Reagan is? Yeah, you do. Okay, there you go. All right. All right. Well, all right. Challenge.
We'll find that person.
Assumption challenge.
If you're out there, identify yourself.
Yeah. So Ronald Reagan speaking about sort of the ills of tariffs and why we should embrace
free trade and really endorsing free trade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he ran that ad. I think it appeared just before the World Series started, or like during a little bit.
In the run up to the World
Yeah,
Series,
yeah.
and it seemed that the Trump administration didn't say boo about it.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what that tipping point was.
Yeah.
But it seems the narrative seems to be that when it became clear that the legality of Trump's tariffs was going to be challenged in the Supreme Court
Yes.
and was going to be heard in the Supreme
Yes.
Court,
Yes.
is when this became an issue.
Yeah.
Because they've conflated the ad, rightly or wrongly, with trying to influence the Supreme Court,
That's right.
hearing.
Yeah.
It did run in the run up to the World Series and ran during the first 2 games of the World Series.
That's right. Okay.
And that's apparently what really was the set off.
Yeah.
Because evidently there was some commitment from Ontario to back off potentially, but it still ran during these 2 games to a large, therefore, American audience.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then the Reagan Foundation, apparently they were upset because they were saying that Ronald Reagan was actually in favor of tariffs, and
misconstrued the president. That's right.
So ultimately, this angered Trump, and he went on Truth Social and said he's suspending negotiations with Canada because of this ad. Now, my read is very similar to yours. I think Carney has a role, and he was elected to be the chief negotiator for Canada. Ford was elected to be the attack dog.
Yeah.
He's not negotiating on behalf of the country.
Yeah.
And I think what this actually benefits Carney.
It absolutely does.
Because it buys him time.
Yeah.
He's not going to get, he's not going to be able to return to the legislature with a trade deal. Certainly not anytime soon, but for the budget, I mean, but certainly not before the House rises.
Yeah.
And this buys him time, and he can then therefore say, well, I kind of have to start from scratch again because of this ad. And then on the American side of things, when Trump says he is suspending trade negotiations with a country, what does that really mean, right? He's going to stop taking our calls. Like, it doesn't. All it means is that there aren't active meetings taking place. And to me, I think it's the perfect cover for a trade deal not happening, and it doesn't really have any real implication on the timeline of getting a trade deal put in place. The only person who's trying to kind of really try to make sense of it all is Pierre Poilievre, because what he's saying is, he's saying, well, didn't the Prime Minister take a look at the ad before it went out? Did he approve the ad? There's sort of a kind of this scramble to understand what happened.
Sure.
But all in all, it sort of provides this neat little narrative that benefits Carney, that paints Ford as an effective attack dog because he angered the president. And I'm sure Trump's happy because he doesn't have to make any concessions anytime soon, because he bought himself some more time. So it's sort of this perfect storm, in my view.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. Yeah. The only person who has said that we were close to finalizing some kind of trade deal has been Carney's camp, who of course is going to say that.
Yeah.
Whether now, how close? Let's just assume everyone's being intellectually honest here. How close is close? We have no idea. And if you weren't close, you're still going to say we were close.
Yeah.
So to me, the Prime Minister and his team benefit hugely from trade being suspended in this particular fashion. Had Trump come out and said, look, we are frustrated with our negotiations with Prime Minister Carney, and we are going to need more time, or we're going to table the conversations, whatever the case may be, that would be a terrible look for the Prime Minister. But for Ford to put out the ad that he did only further enhances sort of the Canadian perception of Trump as being mercurial and flying off the handle. Yes. So he fits the Canadian narrative perfectly of he's overreacting to something that is sort of grounded in truth. No one's actually saying it's wrong. Even the Reagan Foundation or Reagan Library, whoever these folks are saying some quotes were taken out of context. But upon review, nothing was taken out of context. Yeah. They re-sequenced some pieces, but it's still truthful to Reagan's original message. The only person who is so this all fits this narrative really nicely of Trump overreacting to something and flipping the table over and walking away. And Carney and his team get to take the higher ground and say, well, my good friend Doug here, maybe overstepped a little bit. But it's been interesting to see that Prime Minister Carney has not in any way admonished Premier Ford over what is happening here. He's acknowledged he's seen the ad before it got aired and did nothing to suggest that Ford did anything wrong. He said he did indicate that it influenced the trade talks, but hasn't gone so far as to say, I've asked Premier Ford not to do so in the future, or I'm asking other premiers to similarly step down.
No disciplinary.
This has been it's been remarkable to me because I see it exactly the same way you have. This is all smoke and noise. To create the perfect opportunity for Carney to blame something else for the lack of progress is made. I don't even say they're doing a bad job. I just think it's a longer process.
No, exactly.
And they severely overcommitted to the timeline that this would get done. I don't think they're doing anything wrong other than they just set expectations in a completely unreasonable place.
Absolutely. It buys them time, and it also coincides quite nicely with getting support for the budget. The Conservatives are clearly angling for a loss of confidence in the House and a winter election. And I think if Trump says that he's suspending negotiations, then is that not a good reason for the Bloc and the NDP to and whoever else to support the budget so that we can weather this storm until Trump gets his act together again and we resume negotiations.
Do you think the Conservatives really want to see that budget fall? I actually think they're counting on the NDP to prop up the budget. And that's why they're being so outspoken, because they know it's just going to be rhetoric. I have to believe, because there's the two levels of these conversations, right? There's the conversation around governance, and there's the conversation around electability. They risk losing their governing position if they go for the electability conversation. If they force an election to happen, I can't see a scenario where the Conservatives gain ground here. The polling generally shows that people aren't super happy with the economic condition, but people aren't hanging it all on Carney right now. If we went to a winter election, I think we'd very likely end up right back here where we are right now.
I agree.
I mean, there may be a seat here or there that would shift. But in the main, I don't see the Conservatives offering anything. And I think part of it is the irony for Poilievre is that he has nothing he can say here. Because whenever he criticizes Carney as it pertains to trade, he risks sounding like he's siding with Trump. And the number one thing he's been accused of in the mind of Canadians in the last election is that he was too much like Trump. So he's put himself in a position where he can't win. And I thought this time away from office, he would have used to come up with some new way of reframing himself. But it seems like he can't help but be who he is, which I guess is to his credit. But I just don't know that what he's offering Canadians is different in any way other than sounding like he's Canadian Trump all over again. So I think he's put himself in a position where the last thing he wants is for this government to fall, because I think he risks losing even further ground as a result.
It's a good read, and I completely agree in the main. I think strategically it would be asinine to want to go back to the polls as a conservative. But I think
they also have no money right now.
Exactly. But I think there was this angle rather, at least before all this trade stuff happened, where the optics of the Liberals having been elected just a few months ago, not even being able to capture the confidence of the House for the first budget, I think that would do irreparable damage to the image of Carney among Canadians. But I agree with you. I think from an electoral standpoint, the Conservatives gain nothing.
So I do think this is a lot of, I think he has to do this, Poilievre being the case here, to sound outraged, to be outraged, but I think he is absolutely counting on the NDP, who, by the way, would be the biggest losers if there was another election. That party would cease to exist. So I think he's very much counting on those NDP MPs to hold up that budget, and thus is being as outspoken as he is. I think if there was any real chance that they could win, I think you'd hear him coming across in a much more polished, prime ministerial way. But he's choosing to be his old attack dog self because he knows this is actually paying to his base without any risk or downside.
Absolutely. And it's kind of ridiculous, just as an aside, all this talk around reducing deficit spending. I think, and even I'll give the Liberals some criticism here too. Let's stop with this operational budget, like
makes no sense.
It makes no sense. This is not the time for it, clearly. And also it just hurts young people.
Yeah.
Young people are the ones who are going to enter the sort of the entry level public service jobs. And if you're going to cut those, well then, women and young people and
racialized
individuals, they stand to suffer. So, yeah.
No, it doesn't. So just to wrap up the Ford ad piece. So we sort of seem to agree that this thing, what it was and how it's benefited the federal government at the time. $75 million of Ontario taxpayer money went into that ad.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Actually, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
I'm ultimately okay with it, just because I think if we were to look at the ad just purely from a sort of I guess if we were to measure it in terms of its impact on being effective in communication, it was a very effective communication device. I think also it's important for Americans watching the World Series or whatever it is to understand a different perspective. And I think part of it is I think many people are not even aware that Ronald Reagan was one of the chief architects of neoliberalism and free trade. Him and Margaret Thatcher, So I think from my point of view, $75 million is a drop in the bucket with respect to the efficacy of our communication. But if it was any more than that, maybe I'd have a different opinion. What are your thoughts?
I think I'm okay with it because we're talking about billions of dollars of trade that hangs in the balance. So what's 70? Again, these are all magic numbers anyway. Like what is $75 billion? I can't. My brain can't even wrap my head around that. But in the main, when you consider what is the potential repercussion in terms of trade, what that means in terms of jobs, what that means in terms of protecting Ontario's economy, it seems like money well spent. The irony is had the ad had its organic, proper run without Trump's response, I'd probably be more critical of the spend then. But the reality is that Trump being who Trump is, he can't help but it's the Streisand effect now, right? Like you got so much more than that ad ever would have accomplished due to his overreaction to it.
Oh, for sure.
Had he just bit his lip and not said anything, even if he had the same, we're going to suspend trade, whatever, the ad its impact would have been limited, or its exposure rather, would have been limited to those who are watching baseball.
Yeah.
And that's not a small audience, but it's not huge.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many of those people are actually going to then call up their local, governor or whomever and say, hey, look, you need to put some pressure on their representative or their assemblyman and say, hey, we need to put pressure on the federal government here. This what they're doing to Canada is wrong. But in speaking out in the manner that he has, in taking the tone that Trump has taken, in suspending the trade conversation with him, and quite frankly, continuing to appear unhinged, he's given Ford so much more exposure from that initial investment than $75 million ever would have bought.
Oh, yeah.
And then you saw earlier this week, you now actually have Republicans coming out and saying the president is going too far in the trade relationship, the trade talks with Canada.
Yeah.
We need to step back from this. So Trump is actually doing the work that Ford wanted to.
It was
quite frankly by speaking out.
Yeah,
the best thing he could have done has been quiet.
And this is what I mean. If we were to evaluate it based on its efficacy, which is are people talking about it? It's actually a very effective communication device.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Ford is some savant here, but he pulled one off with this one.
But I was more critical of it before the reaction, just because I was thinking, okay, well, who's going to watch it? It's not like he's buying ad time on a channel that American legislators exclusively watch. It's just people just in their living rooms watching sports. It's not. What are they going to really do?
Yeah.
But yeah, no. To your point, this is kind of interesting.
It is. I was at the event where they premiered the commercial.
Yeah.
There was the Toronto Regional Board of Trade held a luncheon for Premier Ford maybe 3 weeks ago that I went down. I was able to attend thanks to one of our members, and they after his remarks, they ran the commercial in that luncheon for everyone to see. And this was about a week and a half before it aired. So this evidently was the premiere of this commercial. And I will share, that was a room of like 1,600 people. I didn't talk to all of them, but among those at the tables who I was seated at and around, the reaction at that time was like a lot of raised eyebrows. That like, oh, great ad, but seriously, you're going to run this? Because it was clearly seen as what it was. You're going to go out there and punch, Donald Trump in the face with something like this. And so there's no. I share this to say there should be no surprise that it got the reaction that it did, because in the room of a bunch of people completely separated from the American perspective, there's a bunch of Canadian business leaders. That was very much the reaction of like, wow, that's fantastic, like very nicely produced. Are you sure you want to run that? Because that's going to make him mad. And so they had to know that was going to be the response. So there was some calculation there to be sure. This response from Trump should have surprised nobody.
Very Canadian reaction, by the way. It's elbows up, except when you want to run an ad.
Oh yeah, no. We don't. We should pen a strongly worded letter. So on the topic of trade and stuff, then the other thing I think that's sort of timely that's worth mentioning or talking about is CUSMA. And so we're still a year away from the final renegotiation of the pact having to take place, but in the interim, negotiations are underway, and the federal government has been reaching out to various stakeholders to get input on priorities as it pertains to CUSMA negotiations. And so you and I were talking about this a little bit offline, and I think it's worth talking about here because it was a bit of a surprising development. We've both been doing outreach to our members. You've been talking to other stakeholders in the community as well about what we should. So the Brampton Board of Trade is going to make a submission through the federal government portal to provide comment on CUSMA and where we believe the priority should be. But what have you learned in your outreach? Because I think this is a really interesting conversation.
A lot of the folks who I expected to be producing their own submissions are not. And I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around this a little bit. And I've been back and forth on, full disclosure, back and forth on if it's worth us even doing one, only because every conversation I've had is around domestic policy. And not there's almost an ambivalence about this. What the details of CUSMA? It'll get sorted out, whatever it is. Supply management. Who cares? Like we'll figure it out. But what we need in the interim are CUSMA offices being set up so that exporters and folks doing business across the border can understand if they're even CUSMA compliant, and if what these changes in tariff rates and what products are affected. There's so much confusion around all of this. There's an appetite for small financing, loans, interest-free loans, and grants in some cases for small and medium-sized enterprises that are affected, that aren't the Algoma Steels, right? That get one lump sum, right? So this is actually irrelevant to CUSMA. A lot of this is just domestic economic policy. And so when I sort of counted the actual recommendations for CUSMA itself, it was just really a handful, and I mainly looked to folks in the steel and aluminum industries and the auto sector, specifically Unifor, to sort of gather those. But every other conversation I've had is really been around domestic policy, and we'll put together a submission to be sure, but that was a bit of a surprise to me.
No, and that's why I wanted to share. I came away with similar observations, and funnily enough, the two things you cited were very much the themes of which I had heard as well. Helping to decipher and navigate the current regulatory landscape, particularly as it pertains to what exemptions look like. And we have in Brampton, we talk about the manufacturing sector often, and recently it's been the one that's gotten a lot of attention for all of the wrong reasons, unfortunately. But other sectors in Brampton include food processing, for instance. And if you're a food processor, there's no shortage of small ingredients or inputs into your processes that become a little bit like where they fall in CUSMA, what code you apply to, can be a little bit opaque at times. And so some of those manufacturers have shared with me that they've had difficulty navigating because something as simple as if I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give away who's
Yeah.
talking about what, but like if ingredient X is been processed in a certain way versus a different way, in a way that like to you or I,
Yeah.
like they had to explain to me because it was almost immaterial
Yeah,
unless you
yeah.
actually work in that industry.
Yeah.
Maybe Kuzma covered or maybe not be.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out how to categorize how something is written up can be the difference of, whether it's going to be tariffed or not. And in businesses like food processing, where the margins are very small, it can be a meaningful difference.
Yeah.
So, help more support in navigating, and then absolutely, it's liquidity support right now. So many businesses, and we've talked about this on the podcast already, right? It's the issue is not, what's coming down the pipeline. In terms of opening up other markets, and while we're recording this, the Prime Minister is in Asia right now, in Korea, meeting with leaders from Malaysia and Indonesia and other places. But opening up those trade relationships are going to have effects and positive repercussions over time. But in the meantime, we have businesses who are struggling to meet payroll and struggling to stay afloat. And there needs to be, whether it's in the form of short-term loan, whether it's in the form of relief, like we saw during the pandemic, or other mechanisms, what are these immediate responses? But yeah, people just aren't interested. And I wonder if this is like an ennui that people are feeling about trade negotiations in general.
Yeah.
This is a byproduct of the fact that the Prime Minister hasn't delivered a deal, that people are just kind of shrugging,
Yeah.
or is it something else? But I'm trying to, maybe I'm reading too deeply, but I'm trying to figure out if this is an indicator of something more that people don't seem to care about. This Kuzma renegotiation, is it? Do we have some sort of like fatalistic sort of perspective on how this is going to go, and like we just need to make the best of what we've got? I just don't know how to read it deeper.
Yeah, I think it's just hard times in general right now, and I think tariffs are one item in a long list of challenges that businesses and residents are facing. And we talk about this all the time, but the broader competitiveness of our country and the broader cost of living challenges that we have been sort of top of mind for folks for a long time. So tariffs are just, I think, one sort of an additional salvo in all of that. But and it's funny you mentioned fatalism. Sometimes in this role, like I sometimes think, what can we really do?
Sure.
And so I can imagine individual businesses themselves, especially the small and medium-sized enterprises. I can imagine the level of hopelessness that they might be feeling about all of this, and maybe the energy is better spent on trying to adapt. I think that's a very entrepreneurial trait. In fact, is how do you adapt to an exogenous situation? And there's a lot of a lack of being able to control your circumstances with someone like Donald Trump. And so I think businesses are just trying to figure out how to adapt. I don't know.
No, I think you're right, and that is definitely the messaging we hear back. Is and that's been since the early days of the tariff conversation, has not been we need a resolution to the tariff situation that says this is favorable conditions for Canada even. It's we need a resolution to the tariff situation that allows me to know where we stand and have predictability, because exactly to your point, I am a business, and I'm the business therefore of adapting and pivoting to meet the circumstances of the moment. Because if it's not this, it's always going to be something. So many entrepreneurs I've spoken to, small businesses I've spoken to, and even larger businesses, they've not been asking for a resolution that's favorable. They just want a resolution full stop. Because what they want is predictability. And they have confidence that they will rise to whatever challenge is presented to them. But if you keep changing the questions on the test every day, then you can never figure out how to pass that test. But if you know what those questions are, no matter how difficult they may be, many businesses, it's the nature of entrepreneurship, to your point, is they will adapt and they will survive, but you just got to tell them what the rules are. And I'm mixing all my metaphors now, but I think that's the piece. And I think that's that's what our government needs to deliver more than anything right now, as it pertains to the trade piece. All the interim supports need to be there until we get consistency. But what we need is consistency more than anything else.
I think, and I think the barometer for me is, to what extent are people in the U.S. talking about tariffs? Because in our media, if you looked at the headlines, they might suggest that tariffs are this existential threat to our livelihoods as Canadians. But the Americans are also experiencing the negative effects of tariffs and of counter tariffs.
Yeah.
But if you look at something like the mayoral race in New York City, nobody's talking about tariffs, and they're talking a little bit about businesses and their ability to be competitive and to be sustainable, but that's not a tariff conversation. And so I wonder, and I'm not saying this is the case, but it is the reason why tariffs are such a prominent part of our zeitgeist because the media is telling us that it is, or is there a real thing here?
I'll be honest. I don't even know if it's as big a part of the zeitgeist as we believe it to be, because we now live in an era where your news is curated to you through an algorithm that feeds you and reinforces the things you're interested in.
Yeah.
So am I thinking that tariffs are as big an issue they are because I spend all my day talking to businesses.
Yeah.
And my my phone is feeding me the stories that I'm most interested in because I click on every story related to tariff.
That's a good point.
So of course it's going to keep feeding me tariff stories. If I decide I'm interested in the Blue Jays and nothing else, I wonder if my algorithm changes and suddenly it's all about baseball. Yeah. You mentioned New York City as a for instance. You and I are both quite preoccupied with what's happening down there and what's happening with Mamdani in particular and what that means. And I want to have a whole conversation about that if everything goes on Tuesday the way I think it's going to go. But I was in New York City the last 4 days and just got back last night. And I went down there. I've been following the Mamdani story very closely and I'm very, very engaged. I am a huge fan of this individual. And if you were to believe my Instagram, you would think that's all anyone is ever talking about.
That's true, yeah.
I went to New York City, and no word of a lie. We walked Manhattan up and down. I did not see one Mamdani sign. I did not see one electoral sign in all of the island of Manhattan proper. There was no indication there was an election underway whatsoever.
Okay.
The only time it ever came up is if I was having a conversation with somebody, like my Uber driver, where he happened to bring up the issue of the election, and we just said, hey, did you pre-vote? And I didn't even ask who he voted for. It came up, he voted for Mamdani, yada, yada, yada. When we were in Brooklyn, I saw a few posters. When we were in Harlem, we saw a few posters. But even then, the majority of the postering we saw were for the local candidates who were running for their seat.
Interesting. Okay.
I saw in all of New York, in 4 days, I saw probably 6 Mamdani signs. I saw 1 Cuomo flyer, and I saw maybe like 2 or 3 Sliwa signs. You would not know that there was a mayoral election going on in New York City.
Fascinating.
Except on my phone, it would make me think that all of New York is a giant mayoral rally right now.
Yeah.
So I share it to say, like, maybe the most obvious thing one could possibly say, but like, you cannot always believe the news, and it's not. I think we think about it in the way that government has us. We talk about it often in the context in which government and Trump in particular talk about news being fake. Polyev talks about news being fake, and I think we interpret that to mean that we cannot trust those who are reporting the news to be honest in their take. And I think there's some truth to elements of that at times, to be sure. But I realize now what news being fake means is not that we don't trust the reportage of it. I don't trust the delivery system of my news anymore.
Yeah, that's fair.
And again, this may be super obvious to say, but it just hit me so hard in the face. I went down there thinking I was going to this is not the reason we went down, but I thought I was going down to like basically be in a city that was going to be a huge political rally.
Yeah.
I will show you on my phone after. I think I took 4 pictures of things that were campaign related over the course of 4 days.
Wow.
And not that I wasn't interested, I was looking for it. And we just didn't see them.
Wow.
And so the fakeness of the news is my algorithm tells me this. And that makes sense. I think about it now in the context of tariff and what we do here at the Board of Trade. Like, we are here to serve our members. So if our members tell us it's real, it's real. I'm not saying it's not. So tariff is a real thing because our businesses are struggling with it. We have to be responsive to it. But I do wonder, how much of these conversations are meaningful. I don't know how many of your friends you talk to or colleagues you talk to who don't work in an industry like ours about what we do, who have no awareness of these
squarely
issues.
Off their radar. Yeah.
So it's interesting, and coming back to maybe where an earlier part of this conversation, maybe this is why, when Premier Ford wants to talk about, speed cameras at the expense of things that we think are more important issues, maybe we're the crazy ones.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, these are the issues that people care about. It's seemingly much more so than they care about the issues that we feel are the big, things that are driving, the future of our society and our economy.
Wow. Fascinating. There's a whole that's a whole podcast episode. I think.
Yeah, I don't know really where I'm going with that. It feels
No,
like a late time to bring up that topic.
Yeah.
But it just I do wonder, how are we going to ensure that we are not falling prey to being in an echo chamber here?
For sure. No, I completely agree, and I think the other side of this is we can kind of understand how an alt-right pipeline might take place if your algorithm is telling you that immigrants are committing all this crime and they're whatever, taking jobs or whatever, like you will believe that is reality.
Yeah,
and because you feel like it's so prevalent because it's on your phone. In the same way that I'm surprised to hear that New York's not just littered with signs of.
It is crazy. You would not even know there was an election.
That is,
let alone
insane.
Any particular candidate. You would not even know there was an election.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
That is absolutely.
And this is like the number one political story. If I were to believe my perception of how I interpret the media, this is the biggest news story in America right now.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even know it was happening.
Yeah, that's nuts.
And I think I saw one person walking around with a Mamdani pin on.
Yeah.
And of course it was in a bookstore.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's that. So it's and to your point, I want to share it because that was the jumping off point, was your comment earlier about how tariffs are being perceived differently in the U.S. versus here.
Yeah.
Where absolutely the economic indicators would suggest that people are starting to feel the effects, and those who we speak to who are in that business, who are economists, would tell you those effects are going to become much more pronounced in the coming months.
Yeah.
But if your interpretation of your situation is coming from a media source that's telling you it's not about tariff, it's about this, which is what it seems that Trump is masterful at doing, is spinning things to indicate why this is happening in his world, not in defiance of any fact or information.
Yeah.
Well, if that's what you subscribe to, if you're getting your news through Truth Social, then tariffs are great.
Yeah.
And I don't know why you would ever think otherwise.
And
because I fell for it. I fell for it this week.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, for folks who are in elected positions here, it is very convenient to ignore, or not ignore, but to blame tariffs for structural problems that have existed long before tariffs, because this has provided convenient cover for decisions that you could otherwise be held accountable for.
100%. And I know you and I have talked about this, and I will continue to say it. I think the best thing that happened for the federal government was tariffs.
Yes,
because it's allowed them to blame the boogeyman in America for everything that's wrong in Canadian society right now. Seems to have some relationship or another, however tenuous or specious, to tariff. And focusing on tariff at the expense of everything else allows this government to not have to solve problems that are much more difficult and intractable to solve, but still merit being addressed. And we talk, because we keep talking about these issues of basic competitiveness and so forth. These are not hypotheticals. These are very real problems that need to be solved. But as long as we focus on trade negotiations with the United States, we are able to conveniently overlook these much more difficult challenges that need to be addressed.
For sure.
And not just within the business community. We're talking about the educational sector, immigration, crime. Everything gets pushed under a rug here. And I think in many ways, Trump handed this government a gift.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't have to talk about anything else. It's the crazy man's fault.
Yeah. Okay. Is there another topic that you wanted to get to? Because I do have an idea for a little on-the-spot segment.
Go for it. I think we're coming up on time anyway, so I'll let you take this one.
All right. Is there a piece of media that you've consumed, a podcast or a book or just some interesting idea that you've been thinking about, that you would like to share?
Oh, goodness. That is so unfair.
And does that be related to the work that we do here?
I will say this, because I've had this thought. So I referenced being in a bookstore earlier this week. So when I was in New York, name drop, I went to Strand. Like, it's my favorite bookstore. I love bookstores. It's my favorite bookstore in the world. I love going there.
Okay.
And I won't speak to a particular book, although there was a couple that jumped out at me. But I remember having this observation very specifically because I was thinking we were there for I was there, me and my son went, and we were there for about an hour and a half. He was downstairs looking at music books and so forth, and I just wandered around. And I was thinking to myself, why do I love bookstores so much? And there's this piece to it, no doubt, that's about the smell and the olfactory part of it and the touching the books and all that stuff. But I realized that, and I'll have a better answer to this question in the future because I trust you've got a good answer. But why? Yes, the question. But I did realize this, and it's been rolling around in my head for the last couple of days, that the pace at which I function through life is so on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing, that I don't reflect. And one of the reasons I think I really love bookstores, it's an analog world that I'm walking around in. And what the books provide for me as I look at the dust jackets, as I look at the titles, as I read the synopses on the back, they become prompts for me to think about stuff. And I realized what I love about bookstores, it's one of the few places where everything slows down for me. And I look at it, flip a book over and go, that's interesting. I wonder what that means for me. Oh, that's neat. I wonder what this means for me. Oh, I don't ask myself this question. What does that mean for me? And then I walk around for another 20 minutes and I think about that until the next book title grabs my attention and I read it. And in that walking around that bookstore, I had all these little pieces of ephemera that lodged themselves in my brain around, this is, am I prioritizing? Everything from self-help, am I prioritizing and living my life the way I want to what we're doing here at work, was looking at some books that were around business and the economy, to some books on art and what does that mean for me? But I know I'm kind of dancing around your question a little bit. It's not a single piece of media, but I realize among the reasons I love media and books in particular so much in that environment is not because it makes me think about one thing deeply necessarily, but I realize it's one of the few things that forces me into a different headspace that causes me to reflect in a time that, and in a work environment and my own just basic psychology and all the ways I've broken my brain through mass media, where I'm thinking too fast about the next thing. I love books and I love being surrounded by them because it's basically just it's a way of asking a bunch of questions to yourself. And that's been what's with me. That's been media related over the past couple of days.
No, that's the perfect answer. That's a great answer. That's an answer I was looking for, to be honest. And that's great.
How about you? Because you always have a better answer to these questions.
No. I really don't. I appreciate reading and playing an instrument or activities like this because it. And David Foster Wallace has talked about this, but there's a clip on YouTube. Why is it so hard to read? And it's this idea that you have to be in a quiet room. And you have to focus on one thing, and you don't have music in the background, and you have to be with your own thoughts, and it's just so present and deliberate. And I think it becomes harder and harder as technologies take more and more of our attention away from us. For me, there's a lot of interesting podcasts I've heard that I'd love to get into the weeds with you on. But I saw One Battle After Another.
Okay, I haven't seen it yet. Okay, without spoiling, tell me, is it everything everyone's saying?
It absolutely is.
Okay,
I went into it having no idea what it was about. And I was just blown away.
Okay,
I was blown away. It's one of the best films I've seen in the last half decade, maybe.
I think Paul Thomas Anderson is a genius to begin with.
Yeah. One of the great directors of our time and of all time. Just an incredible filmmaking exercise. It was just well executed, well directed. I think an inferior director could have made a really bad film with that script, but it was a good script. But to be clear, but there was so much in the direction that made it come to life.
When I think of his other movies like Magnolia, Boogie Nights, things like that, he really seems to capture what's happening in the moment. Really, really well. Mystic Pizza. Was this similarly? Is this a movie of the moment?
It is.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. It absolutely is a movie of the moment. It's gonna. I think this is when we look back at the 2020s.
Yeah.
This will be the piece of media that we kind of refer to, at least one of them.
Amazing.
And incredible. I'm not going to spoil anything, but just incredible metaphors and symbols of our current time. But the thing that I think I've been thinking about a lot is financially, it's a flop. It
Okay.
is like it's made like half the money that it's
Okay.
spent. But I think that tells us more about us
Yeah,
than the quality
sure.
of the movie.
Yeah.
But it's also like I am very grateful it got made, because it got made because Paul Thomas Anderson had a vision, and he had obviously the industry connection to be able to finance that film.
Of course,
and all of
only
that.
certain directors can get certain movies made.
For sure.
That we don't talk enough about that. Certain artists are only certain artists get certain art created.
Yeah. And it made me think about the importance of these eccentric people who have a vision and against all odds want to make it happen, even if it's financially not feasible.
Yeah.
And it made me think about the work that I do here and the work that we do, and the Moksha and Third Space, all of that, and just the stubbornness with which if I have a vision for something, even if it's not the most it's not a blockbuster hit, I should run with that thread. Because the best art is, art, I think historically is something that if you're looking for good art, it relies on patronage. But I think art isn't supposed to be the most commercially viable thing. Like, it's not supposed to resonate with everybody, right? Anyway, that's what I've been thinking about.
No, that's fantastic. I love that. You went to the theater to see it? Like, it's not on any streaming service.
No.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to it. I've been meaning to make time for that, and we've been so busy we haven't. Angel,
definitely watch it.
The challenge is when Angel and I want to see something together, it's almost impossible because that's such a syncing of schedules. That's like insane to try to figure out. But I appreciate you endorsing that, because I definitely want to see it. Speaking of art requiring patronage, did you see that the Irish government is putting in like a universal living basic wage for 2,000 artists a year? You just apply.
It's incredible.
It's amazing. Amazing. I'm curious to see what type of amazing art we see coming out of Ireland in the coming years, knowing that artists have the freedom to focus on their art there. I think it's an amazing idea.
It is amazing, honestly. I can't wait to see the outcomes of that, especially because heartbreakingly in Ontario, we did have a basic income pilot that was scrapped. So let's see what comes out of that.
No, but you're right about that patronage. And one of the other things that we did when we were away is we spent a day at MoMA, which is always a treat when you go down there. And you're right. Like, look, so many of those pieces, like there is that piece of going to MoMA, which is you go there to see the pieces that and you want to go see all the Van Goghs and the Klimts and all stuff like the dollies that I've seen in art books and read about and all that sort of stuff. But then there's a piece of going there that's about seeing the stuff that they've curated that you may not have heard of because it's part of some special exhibition or it's part of some other theme, or just an artist who doesn't have that level of renown yet. And you realize none of that, and that's the art that speaks to you. There's the oh, that's so cool, and Starry Night. But then there's also this oh my gosh, I'm like my brain just broke looking at this painting.
Totally.
And that stuff, to your point, is almost always come about directly because someone got a grant or was had a patron or basically had to suffer for their art to be created.
For sure.
But it doesn't just happen. Because they were a professional artist. No. The circumstances had to be created for that art in turn to be created as well. So you're absolutely right.
Very cool.
All right.
Very cool.
Does that feel like a good place to end for today?
I think so, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you. I hadn't mentioned, but I'm wearing the sweatshirt, so that'll help. Our sponsor, the Brampton Honey Badgers, for supporting this episode. And we'll be back shortly. Between now and our next episode, we'll have the federal budget drop.
Yes.
So that'll be interesting. And I trust, who knows, something else will go crazy in the world. The New York election will be done. So we can talk about Mamdani at that point and what that means, hopefully. Good or bad, we'll know what that means.
And he has some interesting ideas around housing that I think we should be adopting here.
Oh, absolutely.
So, anyway.
And it was interesting. Again, we'll talk about this later, but having seen that city recently through the eyes of what his campaign is focused on really gave me a perspective on city building that I hadn't really considered before, because it's a city you go to and you see the challenges, and he really opened my eyes up to what some solutions could actually look like. And not in Manhattan where we spent most of it, but going out to places like Brooklyn and Harlem where you see where people live and you realize oh my gosh, they're on transit islands, and this is what affordability looks like in a city like that. In order to make it function, you realize the trajectory we could be on here if we don't get on it ourselves. Amazing.
Wow. All right.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. We'll talk again soon.
Take care.
All right.